A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, adored by little statesmen and philosophers and divines.
If a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. A different drummer.
And now, coming to you from dead center on your dial, welcome to Risk Parity Radio, where we explore alternatives in asset allocations for the do-it-yourself investor. Broadcasting to you now from the comfort of his easy chair, here is your host, Frank Vasquez.
Thank you, Mary, and welcome to Risk Parity Radio. If you have just stumbled in here, you will find that this podcast is kind of like a dive bar of personal finance and do-it-yourself investing.
Expect the unexpected.
It's a relatively small place. It's just me and Mary in here. And we only have a few mismatched bar stools and some easy chairs. We have no sponsors, we have no guests, and we have no expansion plans.
I don't think I'd like another job.
What we do have is a little free library of updated and unconflicted information for do-it-yourself investors.
Now, who's up for a trip to the library tomorrow?
So please enjoy our mostly cold beer served in cans and our coffee served in old chipped and cracked mugs, along with what our little free library has to offer. But now onward, episode 398. Today on Risk Parity Radio, we're just going to do what we do best here, which is attend to your emails. And so without further ado...
Here I go once again with the email.
And...
First off,
we have an email from George.
Kramer, you can't go. Who's going to do the feats of strength?
how about George?
Good thinking, Cougar.
And George writes,
Hi, Frank. Short and sweet. If I have limited room in my tax-deferred account, should I prioritize locating VGLT or DBMF in the tax-deferred account to maximize tax efficiency? Longtime supporter of the Father McKenna Center via Patreon, George.
Until you pin me, George, Festivus is not over.
Well, first off, thank you for being a supporter on Patreon of the Father McKenna Center. As most of you know, we do not have any sponsors here, but we do have a charity we support. It's called the Father McKenna Center, and it supports hungry and homeless people in Washington, D.C. Full disclosure, I am on the board of the charity and am the current treasurer. But if you give to the charity, you get to go to the front of the email line. And believe it or not, all three of our emailers today are at the front of the line because they're all givers to the Father McKenna Center.
Yeah, baby, yeah!
You can do that in two ways. You can do it like George does on Patreon through our support page at www.riskparityradio.com, or you can go directly to the Father McKenna website and go to the donation page and give there. Either way, please remember to mention that in your email so I can duly move you to the front of the line with the other donors. But now getting to your short and sweet email, I do have a short and sweet answer. And the answer is you should probably prioritize DBMF over VGLT in the tax-deferred account. The traditional IRA is typically what we're talking about, or a 401k. And the reason for that is because DBMF currently has a dividend yield of about 5% or a little more than 5%. It usually comes sometime near the end of the year, whereas VGLT has a yield of less than 5%. It's closer to about 4.5%. And so as long as that's true, and they're both paying ordinary income, you should go with the one that's paying more ordinary income, which is DBMF. And that will maximize your tax efficiency.
Yes!
Thank you for your clear and easy question, and your support, and your email.
Oh, please, somebody stop this.
Let's rumble!
I think you can take him, Georgie.
Hey, come on, be sensible.
Stop crying and fight your father.
Ow! Ow, I got it!
This is the best Festivus ever!
Second off.
Second off, we have an email from Kyle. And Kyle writes,
Dear Frank and Mary, a deep philosophical question to ponder. A question of fees versus factor. I have a 457 plan. It's actually fairly reasonable when it comes to fees, which is great, but also has some limitations as far as fund availability. The conundrum. Choose a small cap value fund, which is actually pretty decent, but has a 1% annual fee, or choose a Vanguard small cap blend fund, which has the low fee you would expect, but the less optimal factor representation. I should mention that I am accumulating, so this is half of a portfolio whose other 50% is a VG large blend similar to an S&P index fund. Also, care to comment on Vanguard's new actively managed short-term bond fund, VSDB? What could possibly be the intended benefit of such a creation? Thanks, Kyle.
Kyle, I love you, man. Don't let it go, Kyle. I want to hold you every morning and love you every night, Kyle. I promise you nothing but love and happiness.
Well, now you do have a little conundrum there. A small conundrum. I think my first choice would be none of the above, which means do the small cap value in another account. But you didn't make that option available. So looking at the options that you have available, I might just split the difference here. Do half of it in the small cap value with the 1% fee and half of it in the small cap blend, because neither one of those is an optimal solution. And you really do want to stay away from small cap growth if you can. One thing you didn't mention is what index you are using or what index your fund is using as its basis. It would be preferable if the fund is relying on the S&P 600 index. Second choice would be the CRSP index. And last choice would be the Russell small cap indexes. And that's because the first two have a bit of a profitability filter, so they get rid of the very worst companies, whereas the Russell includes them. So I might take a look at that and see if they are, for instance, comparable to other Vanguard funds or other iShares index funds. And that could be a deciding factor. You also didn't mention whether you have any other value options, because, for instance, if you had like a mid-cap value option, that might be better, I think, than the small-cap blend option, because what you're really trying to do is balance out growth and value in this portfolio. And I think growth versus value is a much more important consideration than small versus large, because there's just more diversification in performance in growth versus value. So sorry I couldn't be more definitive on that answer, but hopefully that gives you some things to look at and think about when you're making your choice there, or choices. Now your second question I find very interesting, which is about what is Vanguard's new actively managed short-term bond fund, VSDB. I will link to their little rollout press release thing in the show notes if you want to take a look at it. It is basically a managed short-term bond fund. And this is a representation of the evolution of personal finance is what this is. Because since we went to no-fee trading of ETFs, short-term bond funds in ETF form have become very popular. And Vanguard has sought to get on the bandwagon to compete with things like JPST, which is a JP Morgan fund, and BIL, which is T-bills. And so they had previously rolled out VUSB, which is a very short or ultra short bond fund. And now they are rolling out some other ones on the very short term. And the reason these make a lot more sense now or as they didn't before is because there aren't any transaction fees anymore. If you had to pay transaction fees to get in and out of a short-term bond fund, it probably wouldn't be worth it. If you don't have to pay fees like that, these things are just much more efficient. And so they do compete with things like money market funds, for instance. And one other thing you should know about Vanguard in particular is that they are a copier, they are a follower, but an undercutter. So ever since they got into the ETF game seriously about a decade ago, they tend to look around, see what kinds of ETFs that other fund providers are producing and which ones have become popular, and then they will create one of their own that has a lower fee. And so they did that with VIOV, their second small cap value ETF, to compete with IJS. They did that with their trio of treasury bond ETFs, which are VGLT, VGIT, and VGSH, which are long, intermediate, and short-term treasury bond funds. There were products like that that already existed from iShares and others. But what Vanguard tends to do is look at seeing what's popular in the market and go out and produce one of those things. These new short-term bond funds they're producing are an example of that. And they're also an example of what I like to say is that personal finance is an evolving technology, and it should be treated that way. There are always going to be new things coming around the bend. Most of them you don't want. A few of them you do want. But overall, the trend is to produce better products, cheaper products, more focused products over time. And as do-it-yourself investors, we should be aware of those things and taking advantage of them when we can. The contrary point of view is what I like to call the Dead Sea Scroll point of view. There's an attitude amongst many DIY investors that everything useful about DIY investing was decided by around 2010 with whatever index funds existed then. And that's what we should continue to do and not look at anything else ever.
Are you stupid or something? I'm as stupid as a stupid does.
And that is what Emerson called a foolish consistency. That's the hobgoblin of a little mind. Because if the only reason we're doing something is because we did it that way before, that's not really a good enough reason. You should periodically reassess whatever you're doing, whether it's investing or something else, to determine whether it's still the best idea going forward, or at least just as good as some other idea going forward. Because that's really the only way you can ensure you're making the best choices. And that you are a Bayesian thinker who incorporates new information into their decision-making processes as it appears.
That is the straight stuff, O Funkmaster.
Thank you for allowing me to go on that little philosophical detour. And thank you for your email.
I swear by the moon and the stars and the sky, I'll be there, Cal. I swear, like the shadow that's by your side. Cal, swear to God, I'll be there.
Last off.
Last off, we have an email from Andy. And Andy writes,
Hello, Frank. Quick PSA, Frank. I decided to implement the managed futures modification to my golden ratio portfolio. I made room, and then when I came to purchase DBMF, my broker, Interactive Broker, pushed back on me, indicating that I was not an experienced enough investor for that fund. I think the special sauce, which I know you have, is telling their system that you have experience trading futures and options. I thought some of your audience might be interested in hearing this, given the amateur DIY nature of the group. All the best for 2025, Andy.
Well, I find that interesting and kind of amusing that it would be more difficult to buy something like that at Interactive Brokers than at a place like Fidelity. Because I know that if you go to Fidelity and you buy something like that, it will just flash up a little warning screen saying, are you sure you want to buy this and are comfortable with it? And then it'll let you go forward. At least that's been my experience. And of course, they'll let you buy all kinds of cryptocurrencies and their own funds and that sort of thing. They even have their own risk parity fund now. But yes, these sorts of things are just CYA legal protections that brokers will put in because they don't want to be responsible for somebody else's choices, particularly if they made some kind of mistake. Because you can buy all kinds of strange financial products at Interactive Brokers if you look at their global markets. Anyway, yes, I think the solution is to go and fill out whatever form they want you to fill out, saying you're experienced enough to buy big boy things, if you will.
You're playing with the big boys now. Playing with the big boys now. Oh, that's pretty.
And there'll be likely some kind of door you need to walk through at most brokerages, actually. But as for the, quote, amateur/DIY nature of the group, unquote, I think you may be selling the rest of this group short.
Let me put it this way. Have you ever heard of Plato, Aristotle, Socrates?
Because other than the folks that find me entertaining, I think most of the investors here are pretty well experienced, and the only reason they stay here is because they are curious to know what else there is, besides the typical information that you might get out of 10 to 20-year-old books.
One trick is to tell them stories that don't go anywhere. Like the time I caught the ferry over to Shelbyville, I needed a new heel for my shoe. So I decided to go to Morganville, which is what they call Shelbyville in those days.
So my anecdotal experience of the, quote, amateur investor here, unquote, is generally somebody who's been investing for a decade or more, has somewhere between $2 and $15 million, and has experience both investing on their own and with working with various financial advisors.
Top drawer. Really top drawer.
So if that sounds like you might be in the right place.
It's gold, Jerry, gold.
But I do greatly appreciate the quality of this audience because you guys ask good questions and bring good topics to the fore.
The best, Jerry, the best.
So thank you for being here, thank you for being a donor, and thank you for your email. But now I see our signal is beginning to fade. If you have comments or questions for me, please send them to frank@riskparodyradio.com. That email is frank@riskparodyradio.com. Or you can go to the website, www.riskparodyradio.com, put your message into the contact form, and I'll get it all that way. If you haven't had a chance to do it, please go to your favorite podcast provider and subscribe, give me some stars, a follow, a review.
That would be great. Okay.
Thank you once again for tuning in. This is Frank Vasquez with Risk Parody Radio, signing off.
By the might of Horus, you will kneel before us, kneel to our splendorous power. You put up a front, you put up a fight, and just to show we feel no spite, you can be our acolyte. But first, boy, it's time to bow, or it's your own grave you'll dig, or you're playing with the big boys. Playing with the big boys, playing with the 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 big boys now.
The Risk Parody Radio Show is hosted by Frank Vasquez. The content provided is for entertainment and informational purposes only and does not constitute financial, investment, tax, or legal advice. Please consult with your own advisors before taking any actions based on any information you have heard here, making sure to take into account your own personal circumstances.